Got the finance minister at the moment, so he is talking with us in Davos. So let's go across. We've got the finance minister talking to us in Davos.
What's to be done in a large country like India, almost the size of a continent, with the goods and services tax? We've negotiated with the states. A constitutional amendment bill has already been introduced in Parliament. It's been broadly welcomed. And in the coming session of Parliament next month, I hope to pass that bill. So that's going to be one of the most monumental tax reforms in India since independence. I was asking last evening the secretary of the department which deals with FDI, he's here. I asked him a question, which are the sectors which are broadly still unreformed as far as attracting international investment is concerned. He's still struggling to prepare a list. And therefore, sectors which were the forbidden areas in India, railways, defense, in the last few months we've opened up those sectors also. In fact, the criticism is not that Prime Minister Modi did not live up to the expectation. If you pick up the Indian newspapers, the editorials are, why is he going so fast? Why doesn't he wait for Parliament to pass all the bills and do away then with his reforms? Why is he going by the executive legislation mold, which we call ordinances in India? And therefore, I think this government had a mandate to act fast. And we are moving at a very rapid pace in that direction.
Let me ask you about oil prices, because that should have an impact on your economy in a big way. And I imagine sharp declines should be good as a net importer. How much of a boost did the declining oil prices have on the economy?
Well, the declining oil prices certainly help us in many, many areas. They help us in cutting down subsidies. They help us in our current account deficits. And of course, they help us in bringing down inflation, which we have succeeded. And in India, it's not merely the declining oil prices or the declining commodity prices. Our food prices have also been under control, as a result of which we've been able to maintain a fairly acceptable rate as far as inflation is concerned. Of course, there are areas where they vicariously hurt us, but we are willing to live with them. For instance, most states in India are losing out on revenues. And therefore, the regions are a little disturbed, but then they have to live with this realistic situation because the advantages are a bit too many.
You're going to announce a budget, I believe, in the next 2 weeks. And you have to pay for a lot of things that you've talked about and promised the people. How do you pay for it? Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek as to what we should be thinking about?
Well, we earn and spend. We've also had a bad tradition of borrowing and spending. And therefore, since last year, we've raised this debate. In fact, I said it in my first budget speech that how long can India continue to borrow and spend so that we spend today that the next generation is left in debt and they have to raise higher taxes in order to repay that debt. And that is where we started this whole debate on cutting down of or rationalizing the subsidies. I can tell you, elimination of subsidies in India, a country where 1/3 of the people are still living in poverty conditions, is not possible. It's not even desirable. In fact, the more India grows, the more we have to earn in order to bring those people, pull them out of poverty. But we have to rationalize our subsidies. We not only started a debate, and since that was a line from The Economist that you mentioned, petrol is now linked to the market, which was subsidized. Diesel has been linked to the market. As far as LPG is concerned, the first subsidy reform has started this month. From the 1st of January, all subsidies with regard to cooking gas now go directly into the bank accounts. So almost 150 million families in India will get them. The next stage, we have to carve out the families who are not entitled to it. And therefore, that will be the reform as far as the cooking gas is concerned. There are, of course, areas where there is a misuse of kerosene subsidy. Kerosene is used both as fuel and also in dark areas in India. but kerosene is also being misused in many areas. So the next area we intend tackling is kerosene. I had appointed in the very first month an expenditure management commission. They've only 3 days ago given me the interim report with regard to rationalizing some of these subsidies. The Prime Minister last week in a major address on economic issues had said, subsidies for the poor will remain, but we intend rationalizing them. And that's the area where we intend to move in order to cut down some part of the expenditure in order to finance our own activities. We have targeted a fiscal deficit of 4.1%, but that's not also acceptable as far as we are concerned. We have a roadmap to bring it down to below 3% over the next couple of years, and we intend to maintain those targets.
What about taxes?
Well, all right, that is India's Finance Minister Arun Jaitly speaking.
What your view is on that, and maybe how that could also encourage and incentivize and encourage more manufacturing in India. Thank you.
Certainly, if I was in a position to get rid of MAT, as many people, particularly in the SEZs, etc., are also been saying, it'll help you in lowering the cost. But then I also have a problem of balancing my budget. I can't reduce MAT and then increase income tax, because the money has to come from somewhere. And therefore, till such time, we are not in a position to balance our accounts. For any finance minister to give withdraw this tax or withdraw this tax is not so easily possible. In the current year, I may just indicate, we made a significant progress as far as our direct taxes are concerned. When you have a low on manufacturing, the manufacturing taxes collection is suffered. And therefore, it's a great challenge for us to balance our budgets. So unless we are in a position to up the manufacturing so that my overall tax kitty moves up, it's not so easy for any finance minister to then start offering rebates.
There was a question in the back over here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Nelson Cunningham with McClarty Associates in Washington, D.C. Mr. Modi has really made a substantial effort to turn the page on what had been a period of somewhat scratchy relations between India and the United States. He had a very successful visit to Washington last fall. He's invited President Obama to India for Republic Day this coming Monday. What is Mr. Modi's vision, your vision, for the relationship between India and the United States, and what outcomes can investors expect from the meetings that will happen on Monday?
Well, there is a packed agenda as far as Monday is concerned. But I can tell you, I won't describe it as a patchy or a scratchy relationship. Over the last decade and a half, the Indo-US relationship has fairly well stabilized. When we were in government on the last occasion, the relationship, the building process of that relationship had started. And the last UPA government continued to build upon those initial gains that we had. The advantage of having two major democracies and two large nations in a continuous relationship is that the relationship has matured to an extent that even though we may have differences in some areas, it's not possible to agree on everything. The maturity of the relationship is visible that you still can sustain that comfortable level in a relationship. The fact that President Obama is visiting India for a second time in his term, it's the first time that a US president has come to India twice. He's going to be chief guest on our Republic Day, the first American president to be so. And by negotiation, we are narrowing down the areas of differences and expand the areas of cooperation. So I think it's the relationship between India and the United States being a relationship of two very large democracies, as I mentioned, is a relationship around economic and security issues. And it's in these areas that the roadmap for the future of this relationship really lies.
Let me follow up and complicate the question. Putin really recently visited New Delhi. How would you describe the relationship between India and Russia?
Well, I think India and Russia have been always great friends. And therefore, I see absolutely no contradiction in a country being extremely friendly across the globe with multiple nations. Through historical times and through even our most difficult times, India and Russia have had a great relationship. Russians have stood by us in our critical times, and I think irrespective of the color or complexion of the government in India, that relationship has been maintained. We were at one stage very dependent on the Russians for our defense equipment and so on. Today it's a much broader basket, but that relationship still continues.
We have a little bit more time to sneak in a couple more questions from the audience if we have any. This is a very humble and modest group. Excuse me? Do you have a question? Please. The other thing we could talk about is immigration policy. And one of the questions that I had for you, oddly enough, is what you think of the immigration policy in the United States vis-a-vis so many of the people who are coming from India's top talent network to work overseas.
Well, we've always believed, both in our bilateral relationship and in the multilateral forums, that this is one area where the United States has to open up more. Because human resource traveling from one part of the world to another is a very important segment of the services sector. And therefore, the more we are able to restrict them, the more our ability to expand both trade and services gets restrictive. The United States has conventionally been a great supporter of the idea of opening out in various areas. And therefore, in consonance with that idea, I think, subject to what their own requirements are, the immigration policy, we'd like it to be liberal. We like more Indians everywhere in the world.
Let me ask you a different question. When you got this job, and you started looking at other countries, when you started looking at other countries, perhaps, I don't know if you did this, as models, who do you look at right now and go, you know what, I like what they're doing on this issue, I like what they're doing on this issue? I'm just curious, because I assume when you get a job like this, you start thinking...
When you get a job, you see, in India, we've always look at the last few decades of missed opportunities, particularly in manufacturing. And therefore, India is a liberal society. We are willing to learn from anywhere in the world. And when you look at manufacturing, a question which every Indian asks himself, what if we had started adopting some of these policies in the 1970s? Would we have kept pace with China as far as manufacturing is concerned? Today, foremost on the agenda, and that's one of the questions with regard to Matt, which was asked just now, the real answer is we have to learn from economies like that how to improve our core competence as far as low-cost manufacturing is concerned. One of the components may be taxation, but there are several other components which we have to really learn from their experiences. We have to learn from economies which pass through challenging moments, but disciplined themselves, didn't go in for only populism, and within a year or two got out of those crisis situations so that in the long term there was a much greater advantage as far as the country is concerned. Britain did it recently in the last few years, and I think we have to learn from that. How to generate wealth, and then let that be scattered between your people rather than just distribute existing resources to the people. We have to look up to economies like the United States. And I think Indians, when I mentioned in the last question, travel all over the world and become parts of those societies Indians in India are very entrepreneurial. They want to learn from the best experiments in the world. I think this is what we are really looking at.
You've inspired some more questions. We're going to have to cut it off in a second. Now they're giving me the timeline, but why don't we go here?
Vivian Reifberg with McKinsey & Company in Washington, D.C. If we go back to the discussions with the U.S., what is the one thing that you want to most see change?
Well, as I said, economic and security issues are foremost in our mind. I think our economic relationships have been progressing well. We are also concerned about our region. And our region throws up challenging situations, particularly with regard to security. And we'd like a much greater understanding with the United States with regard to the regional issues as far as India and the region is concerned.
I think we have one or two more questions back here and over here. What do we do?
My name is Adib Ahmed. My question is on an financial sector. It's actually twofold. The first fold is that recently there has been an announcement, and of course the spirit is very high for the NRIs to actually invest back in India. So the first question is about the recent licensing procedure on a small bank that recently came up. But we were very surprised to see that there was a restriction on NRI investment on the sector because 51% needs to be resident Indian ownership companies. On the second fold of my question is, at the junction now where there is a lot of need for investment in infrastructure, there has been a cap on investment in banks in India, which restrict to on an individual capacity is around 4.99%. Is there a possibility that this limit would be increased?
Well, on the eve of the budget, I won't give you an answer in yes or no, but I'll take your question as a suggestion. In fact, your suggestion with regard to attracting more NRI investments is an issue which is actively under consideration.
Yes, sir.
So what you said in the last half an hour or so, I think as an Indian in the manufacturing sector, we are greatly enthused by the agenda that the government has put up. I have 2 or 3 suggestions. When it comes to large projects, when it comes to large infrastructure projects, and I think India is going to build a large amount of infrastructure in the next 10, 15 odd years, we always seem to get into the problem of enforcing contracts and our ability to enforce contracts in our judicial system. And this has nothing to do with corruption from the resource point of view.
Sir, is there a question with this? Is there a question?
Yes.
Okay, good.
The question is that we have talked many times about creating some kind of a mechanism which allows us to enforce contracts, or some kind of a mechanism that allows us to go to a body that can help in enforcing the contract. And we don't seem to have that, like arbitration, for example. We seem to end up with everything in second round of litigation, third round of litigation, and people get tired. And the only other alternative is if you can clone a couple of avatars and send them around and it's fine.
I think you have a valid point. And you have a valid point for 2 good reasons. In contractual matters, the rule is enforcement and not breach. And if there is breach, the legal system has to undertake to enforce. Unfortunately, we are still governed by our old concept that in the event of a breach, the rule is damages and not enforcement. Now, I think that's become obsolete. I had requested the Law Commission in 2003-2004 to reconsider it. And they did submit a report. I've again requested the Law Commission to reconsider it, though that's directly not under me. And I would personally like to push, it's a part of my own conviction that in 2015 you can't come out with an obsolete law that if you built an airport and there's a breach, then go into arbitration and take damages, or go and file a civil suit and take damages, then the answer has to be to enforce. The second, as far as Arbitration Act is concerned, when we replaced the Arbitration Act in 1996, the way it's been interpreted by courts, there is too frequent an intervention. On basis of the Law Commission's recommendations, some corrections have been made. I think some further improvements are required, which is being worked out, and so that it becomes completely internationally compatible. That's under consideration, and hopefully in this coming session they'll be introduced in Parliament.
Right. Okay. I apologize, but we are out of time. I wish we could. We can try to do it after. I want to thank everybody for your questions. I want to thank the Finance Minister for this candid conversation. On behalf of all of us, we wish India very, very well. And
all right, that's the Finance Minister at the World Economic Forum.